Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session about opportunities in clinical research. I just want to cover up a couple of housekeeping points before we begin. This session is being recorded, so if all microphones could be put on mute, please. And any questions that you may have, please ask them via the chat box. I'm now going to hand you over to Alan Boyd from Boyd's, and I hope that you enjoy this session.
Okay, thanks very much, Claire. As Claire said, my name's Alan Boyd, and I'm chairing this session today. And with me, I've got Renee van der Meer, and also Rihanna Ball. So the three of us. And in thinking about what we're going to talk about, it was interesting because between the three of us, we sort of span quite a lot of time in the industry. I've been in the industry now over 35 years. Renee's been there about 18 years, and Rihanna is less than a year. So we've got a whole breadth of experience. And clearly I joined the industry a long time ago, and perhaps my experience would not be particularly relevant today, but perhaps it is. But what I will do is just make some introductions, and then we'll get on and talk about some questions. And we've prepared quite a lot of questions and responses, and I'd love you all to join in where you can. So I'll put various breaks in and ask you to ask your questions, and if you've got comments and chats, then please put them in the chat box, because I am watching them as well down the side. So just to give you brief my background, I trained in medicine and biochemistry, and then as a postgraduate for 5 years, I did hospital medicine and trained in clinical pharmacology. But as I said, I've been in industry 35 years now. And started off in big pharma at Glaxo, and then ICI and Zeneca. I ended up as global head of medical research for Zeneca, so running a huge department of well over 1,000 people, one level below the board, and all the medical departments around the world reported to me. So a huge job. Then it merged with Astra, and unfortunately I wasn't Swedish, so I was made redundant. Joining industry, just beware. Sometimes, occasionally, you do get made redundant, but it does happen. But don't worry about that. You've just got to think about getting in and working. And after that, I set up one of the first gene therapy companies in the world, Og Therapeutics. The three of us set it up with 2 ideas and no money. And we built that company. It was called ARC Therapeutics, and I took the first gene therapy up to registration with the MEA. I didn't make it, but it then paved the way for everything else that's followed with the cell and gene therapies. And the last 16 years, I've run my own consultancy called Boyd Consultants, supporting small companies, universities turn their research ideas into medicines. And again, we work with clients across the world and many universities doing that work. And I've got a team of 25 people based here in Cheshire, in Cambridge, and in Dublin. And we're about to open an office in the States very soon. So that's us. I've also been involved in training, particularly with the physicians who work in industry. I was president of the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Medicine at the College of Physicians. And we actually got the specialty recognised, so that if you are a doctor as a physician and want to train in the industry, and Renee's been through this program, you can get the specialty accreditation just as you can if you want to become a cardiologist or an anaesthetist. So you can do that in pharmaceutical medicine now. So I'm heavily involved in training too. Anyway, I think probably enough of me, though. If you ask my daughter what I do as a job, she'll say, oh, my dad's sort of a professor. He used to be a real doctor. Now he just does drugs. So that's how she describes me. Anyway, Renee, do you want to go next and just talk about your experience?
Thanks very much, Alan, and it's really lovely being here. So I'm Renee van der Meer. I trained as a clinician in South Africa. I moved to the UK just kind of to travel a little bit, and then ended up staying and started studying again, doing the postgraduate degree in pharmaceutical medicine. And I also did a master's in clinical pharmacology. My first job was an interesting role. It was in a CRO, but that was wholly owned by Serono before they joined with Merck. So we were kind of owned by a medium-sized pharma company, but we also did small studies for GSK, Roche, other smaller companies too. And through the work, I got to know people at GSK, and I then joined GSK for a few years. And after GSK, I moved to MedImmune, which is now incorporated into AstraZeneca, but it was a biologics arm of AstraZeneca. And I spent the majority of my career in MedImmune, and I had absolutely the time of my life. I really did. I then joined a small biotech company in Paris, commuted to Paris every week and thought it was a bit much. And now I joined a very interesting, fascinating company called Galvani, which is partly owned by GSK and partly owned by Verily Life Sciences. So we do implantable bioelectronics and not drugs anymore. So I've moved from doing drugs, Alan, to doing devices now, which is really, really exciting. But I think it just goes to show what we'll be talking about as well today, is there's such a diverse field that you can, when you do join clinical research, don't just think it's drugs. Rihanna?
Thanks, Renee. So Rihanna, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I have a lot less experience than than you two. I finished my A-levels in 2019, and I knew I didn't want to go to uni and had decided I wanted to do an apprenticeship. I wasn't really sure what in yet, and in fact, I wasn't even thinking about science at all, because I took English Lit, History and Psychology for A-level, so I wasn't really thinking about science. And then I came across this apprenticeship for AstraZeneca in clinical trials, which I applied for and then got, and I've been there since September 2019. I've been there working in early oncology in global study management.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask you, Rihanna, given your, can I say, non-scientific background, okay, psychology is sort of, on the cusp, isn't it, really, with what we do? And what made you and think about, taking this huge leap, as far as you're concerned, isn't it, to get into science and do a role like you're doing?
Yeah, I as my part-time job during my A-levels, I worked at Boots, so I got my pharmacy qualification through that, and I think that got me more interested in like what happened before the medicine came to market, before it was in Boots. So that's what made me think about clinical.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Perhaps we can come back to that.
Yeah.
Oh, but that's interesting. Renee, what when you first joined industry, because clearly you were a clinician and doing like me, you were a real doctor doing things. What interested you in clinical research and moving in?
Well, pharmacology interested me when I was at med school. I was going to go back and do a PhD, and just life really happened when I was in the UK and I didn't. That's why I started studying part-time and then joined the industry subsequently. But it was just the love of pharmacology, how things work, the biochemistry of it. And to me, it was really just all about the pharmacology.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. My story is similar, because I, as well as medicine, halfway through medicine, I went off and did a degree in biochemistry as well, and then went back to medicine. And then, as at medical school, in fact, there was two professors in the clinical pharmacology department, Owen Wade and Martin Kendall. Owen Wade actually put together the formularies, the British National Formulary, got all that work which is still used today. But both of them, as a medical student, spoke very highly of the industry, which, if you think about it, in the 1970s, when I was at medical school, very few doctors actually joined the industry. So, but I was interested in research, which is why I started training in clinical pharmacology. And then when the opportunity arose to go and join Glaxo, and I should say, when I went to Glaxo was a very different company. And when I joined them in the mid-80s, they made more money from baby food and baby milk than they did from medicines. They were the 25th largest company in the world, if you can imagine that. And I established their phase 1 unit in Greenford on an old milk packing factory in Horsenden Hill, and put many drugs into them, into humans for the first time, that then took them to where they are today. So it was that research interest that really got me going. But as I said, very few at that time in the early 80s, very few doctors worked in industry. Most of the doctors were GPs who worked on a Thursday afternoon, usually when they weren't doing their clinics, and were medical advisors. And certainly when I left, a clinical practice, my two consultants at my leaving do said, "Alan is leaving medicine." They couldn't have been further from the truth with what we've achieved. Anyway, what I want to do, you can see we've got some questions to ask, and really the three of us are going to have a conversation together. But I do want you to join in. If you do, as I say, I'll put some breaks in, and we can ask questions or pop them in the chat room. And if you don't mind, when you're asking questions, if you don't feel shy and you want to put your camera on, that's fine, because it's pretty lonely doing these things when you're just seeing one or two faces and just names. So if you want to show your face, that's quite acceptable. So I'll ask you both, what do you think actually attracts graduates, or even, like in your case, Rihanna, somebody who hasn't got a degree, into clinical research? What do you think is the sort of things that really bring people in? Renee, any suggestions?
I think initially it is the science, because I would think, we do a lot of, in all the companies I've worked, we do a lot of STEM outreach programs. And I think it is the science that first entices people. But, we were talking earlier, what brought me into why did I join the industry? What is my love? And although initially it was pharmacology, I think when I joined, this whole world opened up that, I never even knew. And when I look back, I always think I wish I'd had somebody who had told me, listen, this isn't the next step for the rest of your life. You can pretty much do whatever you want. Yeah. And I think that's what, MedImmune was so great at. You could really do whatever you wanted to. So you could do, I did phase 4 studies. I did phase 1 studies, phase 2 studies, any study, anything you wanted to do, you could. And there's so much diversity in clinical research. But I do think we don't do a good enough job of telling people that it's not just about the science. We do so much more than just science.
Yes.
And even, Rihanna, even though you've joined this apprenticeship program in clinical research, with your degree, you could even go into comms with clinical, in AstraZeneca. There's just such a huge variety. Or, Alan, you were saying QA. I'm always looking for somebody who's detailed orientated, because that's the perfect QA person. And I just think there's a world outside there that's not just clinical research. Doing clinical trials is one small part, but it takes an enormous engine. It's just like one little bolt in a huge engine, isn't it?
Yes. No, I think you're right. And if I look at my career, where I've been, I'm probably on possibly my 6th or even my 7th career within the industry and what I've done. I think, as we'll talk later, probably the hardest bit is getting in, and to do that. And I'll ask Rihanna about her story and how she managed to get in a minute. But once you're inside the world of life sciences, really, the limits are boundless. If I think what I've done, started off in phase 1 doing, quite a clinical role, actually administering medicines to human beings, and there were mainly human volunteers. So I was still sticking needles in and taking blood and things like that. Then into clinical research itself, running phase 2 and phase 3 studies, getting involved with the regulatory issues. I was sent out to Canada for a while to help set up the company in Canada. So that's where I learned what it's like to operate outside of the United Kingdom, and also the business side actually of building a company, and most of it was post-approval studies and medical affairs. So it's and how to run a business. It really is, it's quite diverse. So it's not just about running clinical trials. As you say, that's one part of the cog in the machine. But even then, even clinical trials, a big phase 3 study will probably involve about 200, 250 people just working on it, if it's a global program. So there's a lot of opportunities there. So Rihanna, what about you? What do you think attracts people?
I agree that a big attraction is the amount of different things that you can do in a clinical trial. And I didn't actually really realize that until I started working for this company. And I saw the amount of people, the different vendors, the CROs, the amount of people that are involved. And the attraction also to me was the fact that, especially at the moment, pharma companies are very needed, and also very well known to be good companies, be able to progress your career, move on, and with my apprenticeship, be able to do a degree alongside working was a big thing for me.
Yeah, and touching on the degree, people often ask me, is having a life science degree absolutely essential to get in? I mean, it certainly helps, but I think, Rihanna, you've actually thrown that out of the window, haven't you, with what you've done? Clearly, you don't need a life science degree to get in.
Yeah.
So what was it like for you? I mean, did you find that a problem and a barrier?
Starting the science degree was quite difficult because everyone else had the background of biology or chemistry A level, which I didn't have. I hadn't done it since GCSE. So I think I just had to work harder. I just had to revise some A level textbooks as well as the degree ones, and just try and get myself as ahead as possible. I think it just meant more work.
Yes. Yeah. And can I ask, how did you come across the apprenticeship?
On the government website, the apprenticeship one. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I filtered for science because that had become my interest, and it came up, and I was like, looks very good.
Yes. Good. Well, we can talk a bit more about that later. But there's no doubt. I mean, Renee, I think you touched on what's happened over the past year with science and COVID-19, and perhaps one of from my perspective, one of the benefits of all this is it really has put science centre and front. The fact that every night, it doesn't happen so often now, but every night at 5 o'clock, there were scientists talking with the Prime Minister or whoever was there from the government, talking about what we're doing. And the way that what's happened with, and I should declare I'm biased here because I did work on the Oxford, help work with Oxford and AstraZeneca, and my team did to help them with it right from the early days. In fact, I'll share with you, a colleague at Oxford University contacted me on the 4th of March last year, and the reason is that I mentioned I've got a background in developing gene therapies. Well, the Oxford vaccine is actually a gene therapy because it's an adenovirus. It's a chimpanzee adenovirus, but it's got the DNA of the spike protein of the coronavirus, which is basically an adenovirus, but an adenoviral vector, but we call it a vaccine. So that's why I got involved. And the first email came on the 4th of March from last year, and asked if I'd be willing to talk to them about it. And the next sentence was, because if you've got to think, this was before the pandemic was declared, and we're heading 4th of March a year ago. And the final sentence is, this could be a really interesting program to work on. That's really, I think, the understatement of the pandemic, because look where we ended up. But because of that, I think, and that interest in science, I know the applications are up enormously to medical school, and also for STEM subjects in general. The numbers of people who now want to do science at university and as postgraduates has really increased. So that's been the benefit. I think it's put science on the map and shows actually it is quite important with what we do. Now, I think you both commented on you know, it's not just about clinical research per se, and, you know, doing, you know, being a clinical research associate, monitoring. There are many jobs in industry, and I've just listed some of them out, and we've touched on. It's working really as part of the clinical team, the regulatory affairs. Of course, we can't do anything in developing medicines and getting them approved without working with the governments around the world, with the FDA, the European Medicines Agency, the Medicines Health Regulatory Authority, and all the others. So we do need regulatory affairs. And, you know, most of the people I come across in regulatory affairs do have a science background. Many of them have worked somewhere else in the, you know, the development and life science industry before they come into regulatory affairs. And like, you know, Renee, you touched on, you know, you were doing drugs, now you just do devices. You know, they're regulated in the same way, and a lot of the work we do now uses combinations to, you know, devices to deliver the medicines as well. So we have combination products. So there's regulatory affairs. There's also program management. You know, developing a medicine takes on average about 10 years. Costs, you know, for a huge indication, you'll spend well over somewhere between $1 and $2 billion in getting it there. And, you know, it involves bringing together the manufacturing, all the preclinical animal work, the clinical studies, and the regulatory submissions, and all that has to be planned out. And, you know, when can you start your animal studies? Well, you can't start them until you've got some, you know, some drugs, some material that's been made. So it's putting all that together. And you need program managers to do that. The first thing they need to understand is actually what's the process. So, you know, many people end up in program management from the different parts. And then Rihanna touched on, and really on quality assurance. Again, that's a big part of it. So if you've got a real eye for detail, then, you know, go into quality assurance, because, you know, it's quite interesting in writing regulatory documents and putting things together. We do need other people to check it and make sure it's making sense, and that you know, everything's been done properly. And then, of course, there's good clinical practice. Everything we do has to be according to SOPs, because again, it's highly regulated. The pharmaceutical industry is the second most regulated industry in the world. The only one who has more regulations than us is the aircraft industry. And that's fairly obvious, I think, why. We need safe planes there. That's the only one. But then it comes medicines and devices. So there's you know, the standards there. And there's things like medical writing. If you know, Rihanna, you know, given your, should we say, non-science background, you might end up writing things because of you know, where you've been. So you're a bit like a hybrid, really, aren't you, between science and non-science. But no, medical writing is very important again, and it's things like writing protocols, investigational brochure, and other documents. I mean, if it's basically in the industry and developing medicines, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. And that is very important. Then there's things like data management and statistics and gathering all that data. And then, you know, pharmacy and medicine supply and how that goes on. So again, you know, Rihanna, you've done your experience at Boots with your pharmacy qualification. You know, there's another avenue there. I can see you plotting out your career now as you move forward with all these different things. And the other thing to remember is, you know, clinical research just doesn't go on in industry. It goes on in the NHS and the other, you know, around the world at hospitals all over the world. And, you know, many of the, you know, the major NHS hospitals now have their own clinical research facility. They do run that. I mean, you know, we're working with, you know, with the work I do as on a professional basis as a physician, you know, making sure that the NHS, one of their primary objectives actually is to do more research. We've demonstrated that during COVID with, you know, the recovery study and what we've done. So, you know, don't just think it's all about industry, because the NHS does a lot of research, and, you know, it's funded by the NHR, and there's a Wellcome Trust and things like that. So just say, you know, the world's your oyster once you get your foot in the door, but we'll talk about that. So next, can I just ask then if there's any questions from anybody who's listening in and watching? At this stage, there's nothing in the chat room. Just come off your mic if you want to ask a question. Nope, not yet. Okay, right. So next thing, how do you start looking for a position and a role in clinical research? And I often, I do get asked this from many sides, the most difficult thing is getting in. So how do you do that? How did you do it, Rihanna? You're probably, the way I did it is very different, all that time ago from with what you've done. So how did you approach it? There you were, 18 years old, thinking about what am I going to do? You've got your experience in boots. What did you do next?
I started looking for apprenticeships before I'd finished my A-levels, because I knew that was the path I wanted to take, but obviously most of them are dependent on results, so I just had to hope. But I spent a lot of time on the government website, not going to uni, sometimes even places like Indeed or job websites did have apprenticeships posted on them, but slightly less. The main one was definitely the government website that I looked at the most. I also made a LinkedIn and had a look at different job roles that people in clinical seem to have and what sort of thing I would be interested in before I applied, which definitely helped.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Did you think about internships at all? I mean, clearly you had your experience at Boots, which must have been very helpful and informative. Did you think about that?
No, I didn't. I was quite set on an apprenticeship because I definitely still wanted to do a degree and I wanted to start it as soon as possible.
Yes. Okay.
So that seemed the best path.
Yes. Okay. Did you talk to any recruiters at all? Because clearly, within the pharma industry, there are, headhunters and recruiters and specialist companies that just recruit people. And I noticed there's one or two people on the call now who do that. Did you think about that at all?
I didn't actually, but it would be a good way to go about it.
Yes. Okay. Renee, what about you? Because clearly you're recruiting people, aren't you, into your company and looking on the lookout for people. Any comments or anything to add about how people could get started with this?
Speak to people. And Rihanna, you started early on, and I think that's great. I've mentored a few people that I gave a talk once at the Nature Job Fair, and I met a few people there and have been mentoring them throughout their PhDs and then to get their first jobs. And I don't think you should underestimate what people would do. I mean, I think the one wonderful thing about the industry is that it really is about paying forward. And I was very lucky to be in a company that was led by amazing people like Jane Osborne and Bahija Halal that truly embedded paying it forward into our DNA. And I got wonderful opportunities because they gave me the opportunities, and I really firmly believe that. So reach out to people, contact people on LinkedIn, contact people via email. I was in an earlier session today when somebody said, well, just write somebody a letter. It's much easier to ignore an email than it is to, ignore a real letter. And just really reach out. And even if you're an introvert, just push yourself outside of your comfort zone and reach out to people, because you'll be amazed that the easiest way in is via somebody. Because if somebody recommends somebody, you as a hiring manager are always going to pay more attention, because somebody good won't recommend somebody they don't believe in because it's their name on the line. So I really do think people should use, it sounds terrible, don't use people, but really make connections and network and make links. It's, I can see Dave on the line as well. I mean, Dave's given me fabulous opportunities as well. And it's just such a different world now that from when, I joined, digital is just everywhere. And I think really people should use that a lot more. And ask if somebody would be your mentor. It's very rare that somebody would say no to that.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, I get contacted a lot, and I think the idea that you should just write and get in touch with people, and one of the things is perhaps not ask outright for a job, but you know, to say, look, can I come and spend some time at your company and talk to people about what it's like, because, you know, again, it's the people who've most recently joined companies that are the most useful, I think. You know, how did they do it? What are they doing? What's the companies like, you know, to work for, and things like that. And I agree with you. You know, people, you know, that you know, are on the inside are only too happy, I think, to share that. I mean, certainly I'm always on the lookout for good people. I mean, it's quite interesting, having trained so many doctors and seen, you know, through my training programs, you know, where I've been doing this now for 20 years, the people I, you know, was helping train 20 years ago are now all in senior positions, and it's quite nice to see that, you know, the progression. And I think all those people are only just too glad to help, and that. And you know, last 3 years ago, I was contacted by a medical student who wanted, in your final year, usually it's around your final year here in the UK, but medical students can go off and do an elective for 3 months. So do something entirely different. Many of them go abroad and do things, and, you know, work in hospitals around the world. But he contacted me because he wanted to do his 3 months elective in the pharmaceutical industry, which was very unusual. So I snapped him up and got him for 6 weeks at Glaxo, and then 6 weeks at AstraZeneca, working inside the company in the medical department. And he had a great time. And now he's finished. He is clearly doing more clinical work, but he's really interested in joining the industry. So it's those sort of things. So I think, yes, do reach out and ask. And mentoring is, you know, is very important as well. So with that. There's a question on the chat room. Is the UK the best location to start a career in clinical research? I'm probably biased there, but you know, I've spent most of my career here answering that. But I did spend a time in Canada in the early 90s. I was sent on secondment there because the patent laws changed in Canada, and they allowed the government to have ethical pharmaceutical companies, not just the generic companies. So I did spend 3 years in Canada, had a great time. It gave me a different view of the United Kingdom, and particularly headquarters and things like that of the company AstraZeneca that I was working for. You know, the UK has a good track record in developing medicines. A quarter of the top 100 medicines that are used around the world were all discovered and developed here. So, you know, we have a good track record. In terms of our population, we punch above our weight. We're second only to the United States. China's coming up pretty fast, but that's interesting, that move. But there we are. Renee, you came to the UK to work. Did you come here because of our clinical research, or were there other reasons? You don't. That's not a personal question.
No, not at all. I never came to stay. Actually, I just came to. I had an opportunity to work, and then I thought, well, it's a great opportunity to travel and see the world a little bit. Because when you grow up down south, you don't see much of the world, and although it's beautiful, you pretty much have the world in one country. But no, I didn't. It was just when I arrived here that I realized, you know, how much clinical research you can do. The university I trained at actually had a very big clinical pharmacology unit attached to it. It was owned by Huscht at the time, and I used to work there part-time. So no, I didn't actually come here for clinical research. I came for clinical medicine and to get exposure to the UK clinical medicine. But when I did join, I think, you know, I moved to Cambridge in 2001. I've had 4 different jobs, and I've never had to move from Cambridge. So is you know, the UK a best location? Well, Cambridge is a fantastic location for clinical research. I mean, everything is at your doorstep. We have GSK at Stevenage. We have AstraZeneca in Cambridge, but not just that, there's so many biotech opportunities. And I think, you know, there's just so much, and people really, I think, you know, Tony, I see he's online as well. Once I had to give a presentation somewhere, and I went to Tony and said, Tony, I need help. And he said, you know, you're in a great place because everybody is one phone call away in Cambridge. So if I don't know, I know who to ask. And by Jove, he did. And that's so true of Cambridge. People reach out, help you. And if you don't know, there's somebody one phone call away who you will know. have the answer. So I think it's really, really great.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is the opportunity, once you're inside an organization, there is the opportunity to go and work abroad, as well as sometimes as part of that operation, like I did, going out on secondment to Canada to help establish ICI Pharma Canada and Zeneca there. So there is that opportunity, and certainly I notice with the physicians. We have physicians here who've trained in the UK in pharmaceutical medicine, who are now all over the world. I mean, I was president of the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Medicine at the College of Physicians. We have 2,000 members, and a third of them, even though medically qualified, are actually outside of the UK and working in America, Switzerland, Australia, Japan, all over the world. So there is that opportunity to move. Rihanna, did you think about going outside the UK to train, or you just love Cambridge too much? Is that...
No, I didn't really think about it. Well, just not for the apprenticeship really, but it is nice to have that opportunity that I could, if I wanted to after my apprenticeship, be able to move around to different places. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing about the industry is, it's a global industry. We can't, just develop medicines here, just for this market. You have to involve, it's the worldwide, as we've seen. The vaccines has been a great example with COVID. They have been developed on a global basis, around different countries, including South America. So there are lots of opportunities there. I see Tony's asked to put a comment forward, and I'm not quite, I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure to answer this. And if there's anybody there, there could help who's not on the panel to help, would be useful. But he's asked here, Rihanna's a great example of how AstraZeneca have embraced apprenticeships as a means to recruit and develop their staff. Is that the case in most companies, or are they still more likely to look at graduate level entry? With that, as I say, I'm not quite sure how to answer. I am aware of other apprenticeship schemes. I mean, I've been involved because of my interest in clinical pharmacology, setting up apprenticeships in clinical pharmacology, both in industry and the NHS. But what do you think, Renee? Have you got any experience of other companies?
I'm looking to bring an intern into Galvani at the moment. I spoke, so GSK have a very large apprenticeship program as well that they very are supportive of, and we're hoping to tap into that to bring one of the apprenticeships for a rotation into Galvani. And definitely a number of other large companies as well. I know because I was part of helping, MedImmune was part of the apprenticeship program at AstraZeneca at the time as well, and there are a number of large companies out there who are also doing it.
No, that's good. Rihanna, did you look at any other companies?
There was no other clinical ones I could find at the time of applying, but since then, because of the uni I go to, there are other clinical apprentices doing the same degree as me at the uni, so we met all of those. So there's companies like GSK, Syneos, some quite big companies, but I think there's a lot less clinical apprentices than there are lab apprentices. But they do the same degree, so it could be a way in to clinical.
Yes, because again, that's is getting in into on the lab side of companies is then a way to getting into clinical research. I noticed this when I was head of clinical research at Zeneca. We had many people make that transition, on where they've gone. So that's that. I mean, in my own consultancy, we have an apprentice. In fact, we're on our second apprentice now. That's regulatory affairs, and again, the organisation that helps them train, which we'll talk about, is TOPRA, the professional organisation for regulatory affairs people. Okay. Anything else on that about where do you start? Okay. All right. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, there's another one in the chat room, but anybody want to speak up? Okay, so this question, hello everyone, thank you for being here and talking to us today. I'm a medical sciences MSc by research student at Leeds studying digital health technologies and their design. My question is, what advice would you give to somebody researching digital health solutions? Thank you for your time. Well, once you finish that MSc, I think you won't be short of opportunities, quite honestly. The whole pharmaceutical world and what we're doing is moving towards digital solutions with real world data, the analysis of that, artificial intelligence. I'm working with a company at the moment. They're actually a pathology company, and they take the pathological slides and have developed digital ways of scanning them and then reading them to pick out. They've started with trying to identify breast cancer more specifically from the slides, because at the moment, pathology, it's down the microscope, and there they are. And the work they're doing, actually, they're picking up now, more, shall we say, cancer cells in the slides than they would do just by looking at it using AI techniques. We're using a lot more remote monitoring, and I've worked on a program not so long ago where we had this capsule. I can't describe it because it's give you too much information away, because it's covered by patents at the moment that aren't out there. But you can attach this to tablets, and as it gets swallowed, it sends a signal to a patch on your arm that then sends a signal to your iPhone. And the idea is for, if you're working, if you've got elderly relatives who are living on their own, you can actually monitor when they're taking their tablets, which is really quite amazing with this digital health. And I'm sure there's many other examples. So I don't think you'll be short of opportunities there if you get that. That's where the world is moving. Renee, any comments on that? You seem to be nodding. And,
Oh, absolutely. I'm thinking, call me.
That's right.
No, you won't have any opportunities. But what Rihanna did was the absolute right thing. Start speaking to people now, because you're going to be inundated with choices. And sometimes having too many choices is not a great thing either. So if you can try and sift through things that you like doing and that you're not so much like doing, start doing it now and speaking to people. And one thing we haven't touched on where you go is also the culture where you go into. Make sure that your employer or your manager is going to be somebody who's passionate about development. Because if they're not going to create that culture of growing and supporting you. So I think you're in an ideal situation, but so use it to your advantage and make sure that you choose the right job.
Yeah, that's good.
You won't be short of them.
No. Okay. Now, next point. What about training and support that you get? I'm familiar with many companies. If you think about it, if they're going to employ you, then you're going to be, they'll be paying you, hopefully a decent salary. When you get into the more senior roles, that's going to be expensive, and they do need to train you properly with what's going on. So, Rihanna, any comments on the training you've received so far, good and bad?
I have had definitely a lot of training. For each study that I've been put on, I've had a mentor who has been like my rock. Any questions, anything really, I can go to her for. So that has been definitely really helpful. There's obviously a lot of SOPs to do when you join, and other training materials that have to be done right at the beginning. But in general, yeah, definitely for each thing that happens, I get a training. Something new, I get a training. So I'm definitely never left behind or left in the dark about anything. And there's a lot of people I can go to if I have questions or queries.
Yeah. That's great to hear. So,
yeah.
I'm passionate about training, having set up the training program for the physicians in the industry and the MHRA, clearly it's interesting because it's a 4-year program. It's both knowledge base and competency based, so that's on the job and doing the work there. But it is important because doctors in industry. People, when we first set it up, we're asking, why do you need to train them? Surely they know how to, they prescribe medicines. Surely they know how to make them and develop them. And it couldn't be further from the truth. I said, look, I often say, look, when I graduated, I have a degree in surgery. My expertise, though, is medicines development. So even though I have that surgical degree, you wouldn't want me taking your appendix out, you know, and so, you know, you have to train, and you have to train your staff. And I'm very keen on doing that, even in my small consultancy with the training, and it's lifelong learning. And Renee, you know, you're a good example, aren't you, having been through the postgraduate programs and everything you've done, your MSc and things. How do you, in your present company, you know, how do you approach training with you know, your staff and things?
Well, we're very lucky because we're part of the GSK family, and they have a wonderful website where you can pretty much do any training. And because it's not face-to-face training anymore, it's so much more flexible as well. But I mean, even in smaller companies, you really, even if the company can't afford to pay for formal training isn't always the best way.
No.
You know, Rihanna, what you were saying, having this mentor going to, sometimes that's actually the best advice, because, you know, sitting in a classroom with several people, you don't always sometimes feel comfortable, or there's never time to ask the particular question that you're unsure about, where if you have something you're struggling with, it's much easier going to somebody on one-to-one tuition. And I mean, I've been in a very small, my last company was very, very small. And even there, you know, we had development and training programs internally because we couldn't afford to outsource. And it's amazing. I mean, everybody comes together, you know, somebody will do clinical development, somebody will do regulatory, QA, just kind of a high level presentation. So I think it's so important to choose the right company again. And, you know, a manager that wants to develop people, because that to me is definitely in all of my years has been absolutely fundamental. I've grown the most when I've had people who pushed me the most and were very supportive.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. You know, it's a lot of what we do. Actually, people don't realize, even, you know, if they're not on an apprenticeship scheme, what the training that you get in industry is actually an apprenticeship scheme. I mean, for instance, writing a protocol, you know, you see other people, you read other protocols, and Rihanna, you've done this, I'm sure. You see what a protocol looks like. You're then given the task of, you know, reviewing them, and then possibly turning the synopsis that's been put together into the protocol with, you know, practical experience, and then you're allowed to fly on your own and put them together. So it's all about, in fact, it's the same way that we learn medicine actually at medical school and beyond. There is the saying, see one, do one, teach one. You know, but that's, you know, is what it's all about, really. And practical experience is very important. So, you know, if you're going to a company and you know, interviewing with a company, it's important that you ask those sort of questions about what training am I going to get? Am I going to have time available to train properly and you know, do that? And yeah, there are external courses, but as Renee said, you know, they're not the be all and end all. I think, you know, the experience comes from learning on the job. I do have a saying that you know, certainly in developing medicines and some of the things, certainly in the early days, experience is something I have 10 minutes after I needed it. It's that sort of thing. So think about that one. So now, what about next thing? What about the question, the key skills that employers are seeking? You know, Rihanna, when you went for your interviews, what sort of questions were you asked about your skills and what you did and what you liked?
Quite a big one was attention to detail. I remember we had this little exam thing that we all had to do in a certain amount of time to prove how our attention to detail was. That was quite tricky. And also time management was also a really big one, especially balancing the degree and the working life. So to prove that you were able to do that was definitely a big thing they were looking for. And being able to fit into their team as well was definitely important to them. Yeah.
That's good. That's very interesting, because I wrote, in preparing for this, I wrote down my list about what I look for. Okay. And it goes along the lines of time management, okay, which you mentioned, teamwork.
Yeah, big one.
Attention to detail, good communication skills, both spoken and written, and being able to recognize when things are fit for purpose. You'll never get things to be 100%, 110% right.
Yeah.
So, and willingness to learn, which I think you covered most of those. So,
Yeah.
you know, if you'd have had an interview with me, you'd have spotted it all. So, with that, Renee, what are you looking for?
I mean, it depends on what job, the basic skills, but to me, first and foremost is passion. I'm a sprinter by nature, and so I don't want somebody who ambles along. I want somebody who's passionate, even if they don't have all the knowledge, because if they're passionate enough, they'll gain the knowledge on the job. And I've seen that so many times over and over again. And sometimes it's somebody who doesn't have that knowledge who comes up with the best idea. And it might not be the most formed idea, but the rest of the team will build on that idea and it will become great. So to me, first and foremost is passion. And that passion goes along with culture. You know, it has to be the right fit. Not all companies are alike. Cultures are very, very different in different companies. And you must make sure that that person is going to fit into that culture because they need to grow. You need them to work at their best and love their job. My motto has always been, and still is, to everybody who are in my teams, matrixed or direct reports. My job is to make sure you love your job as much as I love my job. That's my sole purpose. If I can achieve that, then I'll have an A1 team.
Yeah.
You know, if you just love your job as much as I love mine, then everything will be fine, because what you don't know, you'll go and learn. You'll find ways how to learn it. You'll come ask. So to me, it really is very different. But I also believe that you need a diverse team, you know, and what you're looking for, depending on what your team is currently, it doesn't help hiring the same person. You need to choose a very diverse team, because then you only get the best from teamwork. And that is one thing that industry is. It's all about teamwork. There's no I in industry. Well, it starts with an I, but there is no I. It's all about the we. And if you can't work like that, then you're not going to get very far. No,
that's true. And it's interesting, you know, having set up small companies, and even my own consultancy, which started out with just me, as I've been building it, you know, with the senior managers, and we did at ARC when there was just 3 of us, we all decided, you know, to interview. If one of us didn't think that person was going to fit in the team, that was the important thing, then we didn't appoint them. So each of us had a right of veto of one person. You have to get the fit right. And I very often, you know, I do get called into companies to do reviews. I look at the way they're developing their projects, and they say, look, we can't get this going. And it's usually down to the people in the team that's a misfit. You know, they don't fit together. It's nothing to do with the product and what they're doing. It's just that teamwork. So there's an interesting comment in the chat room about you know, that a small company by motto, you can all see that, about running apprenticeships, but the problem is getting the finance for that. Now, I know there are apprenticeship schemes, there's money there in the government, but I think it's getting hold of it. And perhaps, because I know you're there, Tony, as well, perhaps that's something we could take up afterwards and just, you know, have a discussion around that to see what can be done. I know you know the One Nucleus has been involved in that and helping setting up the things, but let's you know, talk about that, because I think that's important. Tony, do you want to comment on that?
Only as much as I put in the chat box, really. I kind of feel there's this depth of opportunity and diversity of role. And then, you know, there's such a groundswell of young, earlier stage companies that could play really active roles, but maybe they need a bit of kind of big brother helping from larger companies, partly on the financing to underwrite, because the runway is, as Davidson pointed out, short, but partly from the expertise and the structures of how to help an apprentice on everything. So I just think perhaps regionally within a cluster or whatever, you can get those sort of relationships and connections that could make that work.
No, thanks, Tony. We can discuss more about it, I'm sure, with what we could think about there. Okay, well, we've got 5 minutes left, and I've got just 2 more points really to ask Renee and Rihanna. What's your least favourite activity do you do in your day job? that really, God, it's another day like that, because we all have those. I'll tell you what mine are later. But Rihanna, what's your least favourite activity? Because, it's not all great, every day, is it? Be honest.
Probably filing documents. If I had to choose.
Yes, okay, good. So if there's filing to be done, that's your day off, is it? No, I've got this protocol to write, haven't got time.
Yeah.
That's good. Renee, what about yours?
I think it's when you start with meetings at 8 o'clock and you finish at 9 o'clock at night and you have no break in between, and all you're saying is, I'm sorry, I've got to go for a bio break.
Yes, I'm with you there. It's been great not having to travel, but if like most people now, I've done this in between 2 other meetings that are running on Zoom as well. Not that I've joined those, but I've come out and I'll go back in again. Zoom, like before, lots of meetings in London, but you go from, office to office, building to building. You get time just to think about things. That's not there. My least favorite job is, because I do quite a lot of medical monitoring with studies. And I do have to review, from the side, all the adverse effects that are thing, that's all put into, databases, and there's coded by Medra coding. I won't go into the details, but as a medic responsible for the study, I have to review the Medra coding lists, and there may be thousands of these, and that drives me crazy just doing that. And it's, as somebody like, most doctors don't have an eye for real detail, and that's what you need. So that drives me daft. But let's finish on a positive note. Renee, what's your most favorite bit of the job? What do you really like doing? What gets you up in the morning?
The fact that no day is the same.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Every day is a new one and different. Rihanna, what about you?
I think probably the prospect of learning, just like the knowledge that I can learn so many new things in the course of these 5 years.
That's good. That's great. So, okay, there's been one final question. Would the panel members have any advice for a BSc Life Science student graduate wanting to find a clinical trial assistant role? I think that we've covered. What I would do is contact companies directly, and get if you can get the name of somebody in the company to go and just write them a letter and drop them an email and thing. I wouldn't just send your CV in. That is, that actually drives me daft when people just send CVs in that are not particularly relevant to what I might be looking for. That doesn't really help. So a personal letter. And the other thing you have to be passionate about why you want to do it. You've got to say, look, this is what I'm really interested in. This is what I've done so far. I'm mentoring somebody at Birmingham at the moment. He's just finishing his 3rd year. He wants to get into the life science industry, and he's currently applying for roles, and he's done quite a lot of things along the way. So I've got him to focus in his letter about the things he's actually done, a bit like Rihanna worked at Boots. So put that, you've got to be passionate and make sure your passion comes over in your letter. So that's where it is. So, okay, well, time is up. We've got 2 minutes to go. Claire's come back on just to make sure I finish on time. I promised I would, so my life wouldn't be worth it if not, and things like that. But Renee and Rihanna, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I hope people have too, who've been listening in, and so thank you very much for both your contributions. And Rihanna, wish you all the best, and I wish I could employ you. Let's put it that way. There you are, just the sort of person I think we need in the industry and in clinical research. So, and perhaps one thing I didn't say, the other important thing is it's important that you have fun. And work. The work's hard a lot of the time, but you've also got to have fun, and it helps if you've got a sense of humour too. So anyway, good luck to everybody, and please, if anybody wants to contact me, I am on LinkedIn and Twitter. So happy, and I think Renee, you'd probably be happy to do that too, from the looks of it, and with
sure.
Okay. No, thanks very much. Claire, over to you. 1 minute to go.
Thanks, Alan. Well, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to the panel for that very interesting discussion, and to all of you who have actually dialed in today. I think one of the key take-home messages from today for me is that the importance of building your network, and start doing that as early as you possibly can. We look forward to welcoming you all back tomorrow for another day of interesting discussions. And please do remember that to take a look at the on-demand content which is available via the app. And thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everybody. Have a night. Enjoy the sunshine. Happy Easter. Bye.
Thanks.